They were America's golden couple, flawless, adored, untouchable. But everything changed the night a single photo leaked online. One photo that questioned loyalty, shattered trust, and turned a fairy tale marriage into a national controversy. The internet erupted. Comment sections burned. Overnight, the couple once placed on a pedestal became the center of a storm they never saw coming. And behind all the noise, behind the headlines and speculation, there was a woman quietly holding her heart together. Valerie Sterling, heiress to a business empire, and the wife of Hollywood's most beloved actor, Ethan Hart. Hello everyone and welcome to Veil of Hearts, a place where love finds its way through the quietest corners of the soul. Today we delve into the tale of the couple crowned as America's golden duo. Perfect on the outside, fragile in ways no one ever saw coming. For years, Valerie Sterling and Ethan Hart were celebrated as America's golden couple. The pair everyone admired, praised, and secretly envied. She was the poised heiress who carried the Sterling empire on her shoulders, a woman raised among boardrooms and legacy. He was Hollywood's brightest star, a man whose presence could silence an entire room. Together they were perfection. Two worlds merging effortlessly, two hearts beating in sync despite the chaos around them. In the early days, love came easily to them. Even with Valerie's demanding schedule and Ethan's unpredictable filming routines, they carved out moments just for each other. She would rush home between meetings just to share a late-night dinner with him. He would reject after-parties just to hold her a little longer before dawn. And every time their eyes met, they carried the quiet certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. Ethan had always been the loyal one, the man who brushed off flirtatious co-stars, who ignored suggestive messages from fans, who never let fame shake his devotion. Even when female fans flooded his social media with hearts and declarations of love, he kept a respectful distance. He never wanted Valerie to feel threatened, never wanted her to doubt him. "You're the only one who matters," he would whisper against her hair, and she believed him completely. But life changed the moment Valerie's father passed away. His death wasn't just a personal loss. It was a shift in her entire world. Overnight, she inherited responsibilities she never asked for. Entire divisions waited for her approval. Investors demanded her presence. Executives watched her every move, waiting either to celebrate her rise or quietly hope she failed. And in handling all of that, she slowly drifted away from the man she loved. It wasn't intentional. Valerie still adored Ethan with the same quiet intensity as before, but days grew longer, nights shorter, and her mind was constantly consumed by crises, meetings, and decisions that affected thousands of employees. She missed date nights. She missed his movie premieres. She missed the little rituals that once tied them together. The morning kisses, the shared jokes, the conversations whispered in the dark. Ethan tried to be patient. He understood the weight she carried. But he also felt something he never admitted out loud, the slow ache of being forgotten. The home they once filled with laughter now echoed with the sound of Valerie typing late into the night. Dinners turned into brief exchanges. Their once effortless closeness became strained by silence neither of them knew how to break. It wasn't that Valerie stopped loving him. She simply didn't know how to hold a crumbling empire and a fragile marriage at the same time. And Ethan, for the first time, began to wonder whether love could survive when one heart was constantly absent. They were still America's golden couple on the outside. But inside their home, behind closed doors, behind forced smiles, behind the glamorous facade, something delicate had already begun to fracture. And neither of them realized how easily a perfect love story could slip through their fingers. The distance between Valerie and Ethan didn't happen overnight. It grew quietly, like a shadow that stretched a little longer each day. And just when Ethan felt the loneliness tightening around him, the industry handed him something that would complicate everything even more. A new film. A romantic drama. One that required chemistry, tenderness, and emotional vulnerability. And his co-star was Mia Lowell. Mia was 22, freshly rising in Hollywood with a charm that felt untouched by fame. She had the kind of youthful brightness that lit up every room she entered. The kind of sincerity that made people soften without realizing it. Producers adored her. Directors saw potential. And audiences saw a girl who still carried a kind of innocence that fame hadn't yet managed to dim. To Ethan, she was something else, something he didn't expect. She reminded him of Valerie. Not the Valerie drowning in board meetings, not the Valerie who slept beside her laptop more often than beside him, not the Valerie who carried the weight of an empire on her back, but the Valerie he met at 20, warm, easygoing, laughing at everything, loving him with a softness that never needed explanation. Mia's energy had that same softness, the same gentle sincerity, the same way of listening fully, completely, without distraction. Their first table read was simple and professional. Ethan didn't think much of it. But during the second rehearsal, Mia laughed at one of his improvised lines, placing a hand over her chest, genuinely amused. It had been so long since someone reacted to him like that, without expectation, without tiredness, without the heaviness he often felt at home. Something inside him stirred. Not attraction. Not yet. Just nostalgia. A longing for something that used to be his. As filming began, Ethan noticed things he shouldn't, little details he tried to ignore. The way Mia encouraged the crew when they looked exhausted. The way she memorized not just her lines but everyone else's out of respect. The way she treated him like a person, not a superstar, not a husband she barely saw, not a man waiting for someone who never had time. And every time she spoke to him with that soft, unguarded kindness, Ethan felt a familiar ache in his chest. An ache that whispered of memories he thought he had outgrown. He missed Valerie. Or rather, he missed the version of her that life had stolen. He missed the woman who used to cup his cheeks and ask about his day. He missed the woman who texted him mid-meeting just to say she loved him. He missed the woman who believed the world would always be gentle with them. Mia wasn't Valerie. He knew that. But she reflected a past he desperately wished he could return to. And with every scene they filmed together, with every carefully scripted hug, every lingering gaze, every moment where their characters fell in love, Ethan felt the line between acting and feeling blur just a little more. Not because Mia was extraordinary, but because his marriage had begun to feel like a memory he was fighting to keep alive. And memories are fragile things. Filming had been grueling, but Ethan had grown used to the physical demands. What he hadn't anticipated was the emotional weight that came with sharing space with Mia. She carried herself with a lightness that often made him forget the heaviness at home, the silence in his own apartment, the distance from Valerie, the aching emptiness he hadn't admitted even to himself. One evening, after a long day of rehearsals and retakes, the studio had emptied except for them. Mia remained behind, hunched over a script, her shoulders tight, her brow furrowed. Ethan noticed the subtle tremble in her hands and the way she rubbed at her eyes repeatedly. He approached cautiously, not wanting to intrude. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Mia didn't answer immediately. The pressure, the expectation, the unrelenting scrutiny of the film world. It all seemed to overwhelm her at once. Her eyes brimmed with tears she could no longer hold back. I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, voice barely audible, cracking with vulnerability. Ethan's chest tightened at the sight of her fragility. He had seen many actors under pressure, many young stars crumble under attention, but this was different. It wasn't just the struggle to perform. It was the raw honesty of someone bearing the weight of their own hopes and fears. Without thinking, he reached out and rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. The contact was fleeting, cautious, meant to reassure. Mia looked up and her eyes, red-rimmed from crying, met his. There was a vulnerability there he hadn't seen before. And in that instant, something stirred within him. An echo of emotions he thought had long been buried under responsibilities and distance. You're the kindest person I've ever met," she whispered, her voice trembling, each word carrying more than just gratitude. It carried a truth that struck Ethan deeper than he expected. He froze, the weight of her words settling in his chest. For a brief moment, he felt the emptiness inside him ease, as if a door that had been sealed for years had been gently pushed open. He wanted to say something comforting, to reassure her, to erase the ache in her expression, but he hesitated, aware of boundaries he had sworn never to cross. Still, in that pause he felt it. A subtle, almost imperceptible pull. A flicker of warmth and longing, delicate but undeniable. His heart, long accustomed to solitude, began to stir with a feeling he couldn't yet name. Ethan withdrew his hand, carefully, but the sensation lingered. He was aware of a shift, both terrifying and compelling. He had come to comfort a young co-star. Yet he realized that the emptiness he had carried in his marriage was finding its echo in her presence. He was not in love, at least not yet. But he was awake to something fragile and dangerous. A yearning that had lain dormant, resurfacing in the quiet acknowledgement of kindness and vulnerability. And for the first time in months, Ethan felt a pulse in his chest that was not solely his own. A pulse that mirrored Mia's, a subtle connection he knew he should resist, yet couldn't entirely ignore. It was a night that would linger in his thoughts, the night emotions awoke that neither of them could easily define, the night a quiet stir in his heart whispered of possibilities he had not anticipated. The late-night shoot had exhausted them both, yet neither wanted to leave. Scenes had dragged on endlessly, and the energy in the studio was stretched thin. Mia, tired beyond words, leaned against Ethan without thinking, resting her head lightly on his shoulder. It was such a small gesture, unintentional. But in that instant, the line between professionalism and something far more intimate blurred. Ethan froze, the sensation of her warmth against him both alarming and intoxicating. He had always been loyal, unshakably loyal, to Valerie, to the vows he had made, to the love he had promised. Yet in that quiet studio, with the world seemingly paused around them, all his self-restraint wavered. He didn't move away. He didn't correct her. Instead, he allowed her to lean there, his hand brushing her arm without thought, feeling the pulse of life, the soft rhythm of vulnerability she carried into his presence. The moment should have been fleeting, but it lingered. Ethan's mind screamed at him, reminding him of the man he had always been, the husband who cherished fidelity. But his heart was betraying him, awakening to the comfort, the softness, the kind of undemanding closeness he had not felt in years. After that night, their interactions subtly shifted. Text messages that had once been purely professional grew warmer, threaded with jokes, shared concerns, and unexpected tenderness. A simple "Are you okay?" became a line loaded with care. A quick note about a scene became a gentle reminder that someone understood, someone was paying attention, someone noticed. And then came the moments when they sought each other's company outside the set. Coffee breaks stretched longer. Walks back to the trailers turned into conversations that felt almost personal. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was connection, and for Ethan, it filled the emptiness that Valerie's absence had left. He knew he was crossing a line. He could feel it with every lingering look, every small touch, every warmth-filled message. Yet, despite that knowledge, he found himself unable to stop. His chest tightened with a conflicted longing, guilt and desire warring within him. Each time Mia smiled, each time she laughed at a tired quip, his restraint faltered, and he felt the pull of something forbidden but undeniably comforting. Ethan hated himself for it, for this stir of emotions that should have been reserved for his wife. But he also couldn't deny the reality that Valerie had grown distant. Their love had been eclipsed by her obligations, by the empire she commanded. And now in Mia's presence he felt alive in a way he hadn't for months. It scared him. The awareness of his own weakness, of his susceptibility to emotions he had promised to control, pressed heavily on him. Yet in the quiet hours of the studio, with only Mia nearby and the world muted around them, he allowed himself a dangerous truth. He was drawn to her, more than he wanted to admit, more than he had ever anticipated. For the first time in a long while, Ethan's heart felt conflicted, alive and undeniably, dangerously close to stepping over a line he could never uncross. And in that fragile, unspoken tension, something had changed irreversibly. Ethan had told himself it would remain their secret. Just fleeting moments, carefully hidden in the folds of late nights and quiet smiles. But secrets have a way of escaping, especially when fame magnifies every step, every gesture. The photos appeared first in an online tabloid. At first he didn't pay attention, he told himself they were trivial, blurry, inconsequential. But then more came. Clearer, sharper. Ethan and Mia entering a hotel together. Smiles that seemed intimate. Laughter captured mid-step. Hands brushing, eyes locked. Later, photos of them walking down a city street. Shopping bags swinging from their arms. Carefree and seemingly oblivious to the world. The images spread like wildfire. Social media exploded. Headlines screamed betrayal. Fans voiced outrage. Opinions poured in from every corner demanding explanations, assigning blame. The golden couple America had admired for years now became a scandal. a topic of gossip and heated discussion. And somewhere in the middle of all this, Valerie Sterling received the news. She was in a meeting presenting quarterly reports to her board of directors, her voice measured and calm, projecting the same composure that had earned her respect and power. The message arrived quietly, a notification on her phone, but the impact hit her instantly. Every slide she presented, every number she discussed, became secondary to the heavy, almost physical ache settling in her chest. She didn't react immediately. Valerie was nothing if not disciplined. She set the phone aside, controlled her breathing, and finished the meeting with her usual precision. No one in the room noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the hardening of her jaw. She was a pillar of authority, unshaken, untouchable, but inside her world had cracked. When the meeting ended, she finally allowed herself to read the messages and see the photos in full. Her heart, the one she had kept armored for years, split into pieces she didn't know how to mend. Betrayal, disappointment, grief, all collided into a single, excruciating moment of clarity. Yet Valerie Sterling did not break. She would not allow herself to crumble in front of anyone, not her board, not the public, and certainly not Ethan. She had learned over years of inheriting and running an empire that showing weakness invited destruction. She put the phone down, her fingers tight around the edge of the desk, and let her icy composure settle over her like a protective shield. The pain inside was real, undeniable, but so was her presence in the room afterward. She walked out, face neutral, gaze steady as if nothing had occurred. Inside, she mourned the love she had once believed unshakable, the love she had thought was enough. And yet, she knew she could not let that grief show, not now, not ever. Valerie Sterling had lost the man she adored, and the betrayal stung in ways she had never anticipated. But even as her heart cracked, her exterior remained immaculate. She had faced business crises, public scrutiny, and family pressures without faltering. This too would be endured with the same cold, controlled elegance. Because Valerie Sterling understood one truth above all. In a world that would never forgive weakness, she had to remain untouchable. And in that quiet, controlled response, she decided that while her heart might bleed, her presence, her power would never waver.
The apartment was unusually quiet when Ethan stepped inside, the city's hum muted by the walls of the home he had once shared freely with Valerie. He paused at the threshold, catching sight of her on the sofa, fingers poised over the laptop keyboard. Her hair fell slightly over her face, but the sharpness in her eyes was unmistakable. She looked calm, composed, almost untouchable, but Ethan knew better. He knew the storm that must have been raging inside her. "Valerie," he said softly, the single word heavy with guilt. She didn't look up immediately. The laptop remained open, a barrier between them, a shield of habit and detachment. Finally, after a moment that stretched painfully, she closed it. Slowly. Carefully. And then her gaze lifted, meeting his, steady and unwavering. "Do you want to say something?" she asked. Her voice was even, controlled, but it carried the weight of every heartbreak he had caused. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight. Words that should have come out easily lodged in his chest. Finally, he whispered, almost breaking under the weight of his own shame, I'm sorry, Valerie. I didn't mean to. I've been so lonely." Her chest tightened. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she allowed herself a quiet exhale. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of the sofa, steady but trembling under the pressure of emotion. "I know," she said softly, almost in a whisper. "I left you lonely for far too long." He took a step closer, then another, his eyes glistening. The man who had once been so composed, so certain, now trembled with vulnerability. His hand reached out, and he took hers in his, holding it as if letting go would undo the world. "I was wrong," he said, voice breaking. "I should have told you. You were busy, but I always belonged at home with you." Valerie's lips pressed into a thin line, her throat tight. She pulled her hand away gently, almost reluctantly, the quiet tremor in her voice betraying her icy exterior. "Your home, my home, made you feel abandoned. I'm sorry." Silence fell, dense and heavy, but in that quiet, understanding passed between them. They held the weight of their love, their mistakes, their unspoken regrets in that shared pause. Ethan's eyes searched hers, pleading, desperate for forgiveness he knew he did not deserve. Valerie's gaze softened, yet a part of her remained distant, untouchable, a reminder that some things could not simply return to the way they were. He took a deep breath, letting his tears fall freely. The vulnerability that had once been hidden behind charm and perfection spilled into the room. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, not to demand, not to reclaim, but simply to share the heartbreak he had carried alone for far too long. Valerie did not pull away, but she did not cling either. She let herself be held, her own tears falling silently, a quiet acknowledgement that some love was too deep to vanish, yet too fractured to repair fully. For several long minutes, they stayed like that, suspended in a fragile truce between sorrow and understanding. Neither spoke, for words could not capture the enormity of the emotions that passed between them. In that silence, they understood everything, the love that had once burned so fiercely, the neglect and absence that had allowed distance to grow, and the painful truth that sometimes, love alone was not enough to hold two hearts together. Finally, Ethan pulled back slightly, resting his forehead against hers, voice trembling but soft. I wish I could undo all of this, he whispered. Valerie pressed a hand lightly against his chest, steadying herself, steadying him. We cannot undo it, she said, voice low but firm. But we can remember it. And maybe that is enough. They held each other a moment longer, knowing, with painful clarity, that what they had could never be the same again. Yet, in that embrace, a profound understanding lingered. Love had not disappeared, it had simply changed, reshaped by loneliness, choices, and the quiet acknowledgement of loss. The nights after that confrontation were long and heavy for Valerie. She would lie awake in the quiet of her penthouse, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every word, every glance, every touch from Ethan. The luxury surrounding her, rooms full of art, walls stacked with accolades, the skyline at her window, felt meaningless compared to the ache in her chest. She realized, with a clarity that was both painful and liberating, that love alone was not always enough to hold two hearts together. She thought of Ethan, of the man who had once been her world. His longing for warmth, for laughter in the home, for ordinary, simple moments that she could no longer provide, they had become glaringly obvious. She had built an empire, yes, but at what cost? Their love, once effortless, had been left to wither quietly in the corners of their lives. And now, she understood that clinging to him, to what they had, would only deepen his longing and prolong both their suffering. Valerie hated the thought of becoming a hindrance. The idea of being remembered as the rich ex-wife, who overshadowed Ethan's career gnawed at her. She had seen it happen before, society quick to judge, to label, to blame. She could not, in good conscience, allow her love for him to become the weight that crushed his happiness or tarnished his reputation. She loved him too much for that. So she wrote. Not a long letter. Not a speech. Just a few words, chosen carefully, each one carrying the weight of her heart and the depth of her understanding. I don't want to keep you trapped in pain. If your heart seeks freedom, I will open the door. Sending the message was almost harder than any confrontation she had endured. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and yet resolute. There was no pride in her action, no desire to control, no expectation in return, only love. Pure, selfless love that accepted its limitations. Ethan's reply came swiftly, and when she read it, Valerie's chest tightened, a mixture of sorrow and relief washing over her. I'm sorry, for everything. Those words carried the weight of recognition, of regret, of the truth that some mistakes could not be undone. Valerie felt a strange calm after reading them, a sense that she had done what was necessary, not for herself, but for the man she still loved. It was a bitter kind of relief, the kind that came from knowing that freedom, not possession, was sometimes the truest expression of love. She reflected on their journey, the laughter, the arguments, the unspoken silences, the small moments of tenderness that had once defined them. And she realized something profound: love was not about holding on, nor was it about surrendering in weakness. It was about recognizing what the other person needed, even if it meant letting go. Valerie pressed her phone to her chest for a moment, feeling the absence of Ethan, but also the quiet power in her decision. She had chosen love in its purest form, not selfish, not possessive, but honest. She had freed him from her own limitations, even as her heart ached with the knowledge that this freedom came at the cost of their togetherness. In that night, alone with her thoughts and the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat, Valerie understood that letting go could be the ultimate act of love. And in that understanding, she found a strange, tender strength, one that would carry her forward, even without the man she had once called home. The courthouse was quiet, almost shockingly so. There were no cameras, no reporters, no shouting from the gallery, just two people who had once shared a life, now facing the legal acknowledgement of its end. The procedure was brief. The papers were signed in a matter of minutes, the signatures carrying the weight of years, of memories, of a love that had once seemed unbreakable. Ethan kept his eyes lowered for most of the process. His hands trembled slightly as he held the pen, a subtle testament to the turmoil he felt inside. He wanted to speak, to say more, to somehow convey the sorrow and regret that filled him, but words felt heavy, insufficient, incapable of containing the enormity of what they were doing. When it was over, he finally lifted his head, meeting Valerie's gaze. His expression was unguarded, raw, as he whispered, "I'm truly sorry, Vale." Valerie's lips curved into a small, fragile smile. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't cold. It was soft, bittersweet, the kind of smile that acknowledged both love and loss. "No one is at fault," she replied quietly. "It's just, we're no longer walking the same path." Her words settled in the space between them, precise and unyielding. They were neither blame nor accusation, but simple truth. And in that moment, Ethan understood fully what she had carried in her heart for weeks, months, perhaps even years, the recognition that love sometimes ends not because it fails, but because circumstances, choices, and paths diverge. He wanted to reach for her hand, to hold on to something tangible before leaving, but he respected the quiet dignity in her posture, the composed strength she radiated despite the fracture within her. Instead, he gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had shared, everything they had lost, and the understanding that some things could never be reclaimed. As he turned to leave, Valerie remained seated for a moment longer. The room felt heavier now, laden with the echoes of laughter, arguments, late-night conversations, whispered promises, all memories that had once defined the essence of their bond. And then, as the door clicked shut behind him, the armor she had maintained broke just slightly. Alone, she let the tears fall freely, no one to witness them, no expectation to maintain control. Each drop carried the grief of a life shared and now ended, the sorrow of letting go of someone she had loved with all her heart. Yet within that sorrow, there was also clarity. She had acted with intention, with love, and with integrity. She had freed both of them from the weight of what had become unbearable. The quiet of the room mirrored the quiet of her heart, painful, solitary, but honest. Valerie knew that the love between them, though no longer alive in partnership, would remain a part of her forever. She had loved bravely, fiercely, and selflessly. And in that knowledge, she found a fragile sort of peace. Sitting there, she allowed herself to grieve completely, to acknowledge the loss fully, knowing that the world outside would never see this vulnerability. Then, slowly, she wiped her tears, rose, and carried herself with the same poise she had always maintained, the poise that would guide her through every challenge to come. Some endings are silent, some farewells unspeakable, but for Valerie Sterling, this was the conclusion of a chapter written with love, integrity, and the courage to let go. A year had passed since the quiet divorce, and life had moved forward in ways Valerie had both expected and dreaded. Headlines now celebrated a new chapter in Ethan's life: he and Mia Lowell, radiant in love and ambition, were finally wed. The press had dubbed it the wedding of the century, a spectacle of glamour, celebrity, and media frenzy. Valerie watched the coverage from her office, a glass of wine in hand, feeling the familiar ache in her chest, tempered by a quiet, resolute pride. She had chosen to let go, and here he was, seemingly happy, seemingly whole. And she was here too, but as an observer, a shadow among the glittering lights. The venue buzzed with anticipation. Cameras flashed, laughter filled the air, and whispers spread like wildfire. When Valerie arrived, she had anticipated the surprise, yet even she could not have predicted the silence that followed. Stepping into the grand hall, dressed in an ivory gown that clung elegantly to her form, she carried herself with poise and pride, each step measured, deliberate. The room paused, not out of decorum, but out of sheer astonishment. She was beautiful, regal, untouchable, a vision that made even the most boisterous guests falter. Ethan's gaze found her immediately. For a fraction of a second, his smile faltered. The joy on his face remained, but there was a shadow there, a flicker of what had been, a pang of what could have been. The crowd around him faded, and in that instant, all he could see was Valerie. The woman he had loved, lost, and perhaps understood too late. Valerie lifted her glass deliberately, her hand steady, her eyes meeting his for just a moment. The room felt suspended, holding its collective breath. "To your happiness," she said softly, her voice carrying a subtle tremor beneath the controlled elegance. "Truly." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to reach out, to explain, or perhaps apologize again, but the moment passed. The clinking of glasses, the murmurs of guests, the orchestrated celebration of a new beginning, all of it reminded him that the past was a place he could no longer visit. Mia, radiant in her joy, approached him, unaware of the brief, silent exchange that had passed. Ethan took her hand, the warmth real, yet the memory of Valerie lingered, quiet and persistent. Valerie, meanwhile, remained a presence apart, observing the life she had released. The applause, the laughter, the fleeting glances, all belonged to a world she had once inhabited, but no longer. As she turned to leave, the movement was graceful, deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of what had been lost and what could not be reclaimed. Her silhouette, slender and poised, moved toward the exit, a figure of beauty and solitude intertwined. For those who saw her leave, it was impossible to ignore the quiet heartbreak beneath the perfection. She was alone, yet unbroken, a woman who had loved fiercely, sacrificed deeply, and now existed with a dignity forged from both pain and choice. And as the doors closed behind her, Ethan could not help but feel the weight of a love that had lingered too long, fading not because it failed, but because it had been set free. Valerie Sterling, her presence, her grace, her silent blessing, was the final reminder that some loves, even when ended, leave an indelible mark that no happiness can erase. That night, Valeria stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her 60-story office, the city lights stretching endlessly below her. The silence of the penthouse was a stark contrast to the chaos of the world outside, yet inside, her mind replayed every memory, every choice, every moment that had led her here. She whispered to herself, a confession carried only to the night, "I once wanted to keep him, but holding on like that would have only hurt him more." Her voice was barely audible, fragile yet determined. Tears streamed down her cheeks, the weight of love and sacrifice pressing upon her heart. Each drop carried a mixture of sorrow, relief, and a hard-earned wisdom. She had loved fiercely, but she had loved wisely. And in that love, she had let go. The hours passed, yet Valeria remained, contemplating the paradox of her own strength. She had given up a man she adored, the life she had once imagined, and yet she felt no regret. The pain was real, undeniable, but it was accompanied by clarity, a profound understanding that love was not about possession or insistence, but about recognition of what the other person needed, even if it meant stepping aside. By morning, the tears had dried, leaving only the quiet power that had always defined her. Valeria transformed seamlessly. donning her tailored suit, her posture impeccable, her gaze steady. She stepped into her office, commanding the sterling empire as if the previous night's heartbreak had never touched her. But those who knew her well, the rare few, understood the truth hidden behind that calm exterior. She was unbroken, not untouched. The boardroom buzzed with activity, deals were discussed, decisions were made, and yet Valerie moved through it all with effortless authority. Her mind was sharp, her intuition precise, her presence commanding. And somewhere deep inside, she carried the quiet memory of love lost, a reminder of the choices she had made not for power, but for compassion. She knew now that letting go did not signify weakness. It was, instead, the purest form of love, sacrificing one's own desire for the happiness of another. Holding on might have been easier, comforting even, but it would have been selfish. She had chosen freedom for him, for herself, and for the respect of a bond that, though ended, remained sacred in memory. Standing at her office window later that day, she allowed herself one final thought: love was not about clinging to what could not last. It was about understanding, about empathy, about courage, the courage to release someone you treasure without resentment, without bitterness, and with an enduring grace. Valeria's eyes softened as she whispered to the city below, her voice steady now: women do not walk away because they no longer love, but because they refuse to let the ones they love endure loneliness any longer. And with that, she turned from the window, poised and unshakable. The empire of Sterling awaited, and she faced it not as a woman diminished by heartbreak, but as a woman strengthened by it. She had loved. She had lost. She had let go. And in doing so, she had preserved not only the dignity of those she loved but also the invincible power within herself.